We got a fully loaded XRT in the house and a Kraton 8S EXB. Now, these two trucks are comparable. I like them, but we gotta dive into the pros, the cons, and the what's what. Now, if I was only to buy one of these trucks all over again, which platform would I choose? Let's jump in. These trucks are absolutely huge and gorgeous. If you haven't seen one of these things in person yet, the camera certainly does not do it justice. Now, if you're thinking about buying either one of these, we're gonna dive into the pros and cons and figure out why these trucks are built the way they are and who they're for. But that makes me want to point out that this platform is entirely different than this platform. Traxxas loves their plastic, and they made this whole thing, this whole chassis out of plastic. And Arrma certainly loves their metal chassis, and they made their 8S lineup on a metal chassis as well, which is absolutely chunky. This thing is so thick. It is just ridiculous how thick this chassis is, which is very cool. I like that. And with this truck, the chassis is mostly plastic. Okay, the whole thing is plastic, and in this case we actually went out and got an upgrade from GPM, their bash bar, just to create that bit of extra strength where the metal chassis is going to be doing better than the plastic chassis. I mean, you hit something the wrong way, you're going to crack your whole chassis. We've all seen videos from people like Kevin Talbot where the chassis just breaks in half. So I think we're going to prevent it with this, but it's a little bit of extra money you got to spend to get similar performance, but they are two very different platforms, that's for sure. So out of the box, the suspension on the Kraton, I think, wins. Now, we have put in some upgrades to the suspension to bring it up to par. So better springs, better shock shaft, shock purchases. We've redone the fluids, the caps. So we've put a lot of effort into bringing these up to par, whereas I think more right out of the box, these are going to do a little bit better, even though they don't have the metal perches or shock caps. They just seem like they're going to perform quite a bit better than these guys. Time will tell. With the suspension ride height, I find that a little bit more droop on the wheels gives me a little bit better air control when I'm jumping it. I'm not really sure why, but whenever you see trophy trucks and their suspension just hauls all the way down, creates a lower center of gravity, I feel like that's part of it, and this one might do better in that scenario than this one. It's a little lower to the ground. It's gonna be better to drive on the street, also telling by the tires and by the images. You can see how much lower that sits. It's more horizontally even, whereas this one sits up a bit. So they are different trucks. We can't compare them one to one, but they are designed a little different. Now, the next thing to talk about is the plastics used in these trucks. And what better way to do it than start with the body? Now, of course, this is a pin clip system, so you use pins to take it on and off, which is kind of annoying, but industry standard, and you know, we'll live with it, not the end of the world. But these bodies from Arrma are beautifully designed. I love all the decals and sort of that forged carbon look. And total side note, here's a real forged carbon body I'm working on. It's still got some defects that I'm trying to work out and will improve, but this is a real forged carbon body that is gorgeous. And I'm maybe thinking about doing one for this, but I'm working on one for the Kraton 6S. So haven't got any decals on there yet, but man, this thing looks so sick. So maybe I'll do a video on that one of these days. If you guys are interested, comment down below. But after bashing many of the Kraton 6S bodies, I know that this body doesn't hold up all that well. So I would do a shoe glue and mesh on that body right away if I'm going to be bashing it hard, just because that plastic isn't all that great. Whereas on this, we've got a lot more strength right out of the box, okay? And compared to the Sledge and compared to other Traxxas vehicles I've driven, I've found that the plastics are so much better. So it doesn't feel like it's all that much thicker, but it certainly lasts longer. And I'm not really sure why, but it's very clear that the compound they use in their truck bodies are superior. So in this case, the Traxxas one wins because of the clipless body design and the plastics they use, this just tends to break, and it's got the pin clip system, so this one's going to take a little bit of a win. While we're on plastics, I want to say in general, Traxxas does have better plastics, and maybe that's the reasoning for using an entire plastic chassis. However, plastics do tend to break more than metals do, and so I'm not really a big fan of plastics, but it does keep the weight down, and if you reduce your weight, you break things less. So Traxxas definitely has their plastics on lock. I mean, on my sledge, as a comparison, in this case, the smaller scale of both of these, the sledge, I have never broken one arm yet. And you guys know how I bash. It's very surprising I've never broken an arm. Okay, but my Kraton 6S, I've broken maybe 20 sets of arms, and I've owned them for almost the same amount of time, bashed them equally as hard. They do have different components inside, so the weight is a little different, but it does say something about their plastics. I mean, right here you can see these are really flexible, okay? And we'll see how well that works with this kind of weight. Flexible isn't always better because sometimes softer compound just sort of tears out. Whereas harder compounds like what Arma uses, like these don't flex as much. So we tend to see the tearing right around the hinge pins, but who knows? I mean, if I'm just gonna leave this stock and not upgrade at all, I mean, it might do okay, but with extra upgrades, like if you're gonna do the bigger motor, you're gonna run 12S, you know, you're gonna take that approach, this truck might not do so well just because of the arms, and it's just a pain in the ass to always be repairing them and replacing them. That's really it. It's a cheap fix. It's just a pain in the butt. Whereas even here, this is less of a pain in the butt to repair, just the way that you have to actually fix it. It's just a screw and a pin pops out, you replace it. Where this one, you have to actually do quite a bit and take off the innards and just do a whole bunch. So this is a bigger job than this one. So, and the arms are, you know, that's a consumable, right? But if we don't have to fix it, that would be ideal. So overall, the plastics, I mean, Traxxas is definitely going to take a win on this, but Arma designs more metal. Like the amount of structural components that are actually metal in this is far greater than this. So, you know, I'm not worried about bending or breaking a chassis necessarily. It's going to take a lot more effort to do that than to break this, which we had to spend some extra money to solve when it comes to that. Okay, so plastics, I mean, these things are half plastic, half metal, so we really want to talk about it because it does play a big role in how these things perform. That being said, let's have a look at the electronics. So we know Spectrum does a decent job of having their electronics hold up to the abuse that we put these things through. But unfortunately, Spectrum and Horizon, it's just not the best service out there. So if you do have any problems with these, it tends to be a real pain in the ass. But that's okay because, you know what, this has an 1100 kV motor stock, which is pretty impressive because we had to spend a ton of time and money to upgrade this to an 1100 kV motor, which is absolutely gonna rip. But in this case, it just comes stock. Now, I think for the most part, I've been really happy with most of the motors that come stock with all these trucks, even the 6S, the 8S. So far, I'm really happy with the way they perform. It typically comes down to the ESC. So in this case, we definitely upgraded to the Max 5 just because it's so much easier to tune them and they're sensored, so they work with the motor. It's just a better overall experience working with Hobbywing than it is with most other electronics. Not to say that they're superior, but I do prefer Hobbywing over something like Spectrum. Now, if I was to do anything in this truck, this would probably be the only thing I would touch. I would go to like a Max 4, maybe a Max 5, depending. And I think that would make this truck just perfect, just as is. Touch nothing else other than change the ESC. So I would give this a chance though, because even though this is upgraded, the stock electronics right out of the XRT, I mean, I've seen tons of people on the internet just talk about how they've burnt them out. They don't last very long. And I've seen that to be true. I've smoked out a bunch of the stock electronics from Traxxas. We did that with the Sledge. They just do not last, whereas the motors seem to do far better. Now, if you look underneath this ESC, this has a true 5th scale servo in it, which is huge. Like, it is massive, okay? Which I think is gonna fare much better in a truck this size than this one, which we had to upgrade. So this one actually sits underneath. You have to unbolt the whole bottom, which reveals the servo. But the stock one, again, people have complained about how sloppy they are, and it's not a true 5th scale. It's kind of like this in between, because it is a 6th scale truck. So it is, I guess, supposed to be in between, but it just doesn't stand up to the performance that we need. So we upgraded to a 55 kg servo, which needs a special bracket and special things from Traxxas, which I wish they would get over themselves on making things more proprietary, because it just makes it difficult for us, the end consumer, when we look to buy, use, wrench, upgrade. All of these things play a factor when buying this kind of truck, because it's not cheap. And just to say, I mean, you need a really big backyard to drive these trucks. So in this case, the Max 5, we designed a really nice ESC plate, an RX box, and a button hold to be able to fit this 1100 kV motor in here. Most of the main components for the motor and the structural pieces, as well as the gearing, is all Vitavon. That's really what's bringing this whole truck together. And then there's some other peripheral parts from like Trio, GPM, and Traxxas. So it's a combination of parts here that really brings this truck together. So the last thing on the electronics would be the remote that both of these come with. So the Spectrum remote is far better than the Traxxas remote. Everybody knows the Traxxas remote. Some people like them, but I hate them. It feels like a toy, and they don't even give you a better remote in the most expensive trucks that they sell. So I'm kind of a little sad that they don't do that. And Spectrum definitely takes the win here. Just the way it feels in your hand, how responsive it is, just where the trim is. I think Spectrum takes the win here. However, I always upgrade to a FlySky GT5. These are my go-to. They're cheap, they're simple, they feel really good in the hand. If you're interested in a remote, I definitely would suggest this, but this is not really an upgrade video. I'm just kind of giving you a good sense of what I typically do. This is number one, always upgrade this in the truck before anything else. But if you're looking for ready to run, the Spectrum takes the win. So after spending a ton of time looking at both trucks, I'm going to point out the major cons, and you can decide for yourself whether that's worth it for you when you're buying these kind of trucks. Number one on the XRT is going to be the plastic chassis. Unfortunately, that is the biggest weak spot. Even though it is reducing weight, it is the point where plastics just break more often, and if you break a chassis, now you're having to rebuild the whole truck, and that's just a super pain in the ass. Now, I think you can solve that by like having your bash bar, like that GPM one there, but it is a con, okay? Everything else out of the box, I'm very happy with. Whereas on the Kraton, the biggest weak spot, I'm just gonna call it now, is gonna be the arms and the knuckles, okay? Now, there's really nothing you can do to solve arms breaking other than drive a little bit better. But we all know we crash, the thing starts flipping, it's a ton of weight. You're gonna probably break more arms on this than you will that. And the hubs tend to break as well because they're just plastic, and the way they have these pillow balls, they tend to pop out. And once they've popped, this entire knuckle needs to be replaced. So you can buy upgraded knuckles, but again, now you're adding more weight to the truck, so you really have to determine whether that's worth the upgrade, not just the money, not just the time, but is adding weight to this truck gonna break more things or less things? So those are the two weak spots in the truck, okay? And I just wanna make one extra comment here, because we did add the metal knuckles and hubs from Traxxas on all four corners here, okay? Which makes it more like an Ultimate. That was kind of my goal. Now, in hindsight, I have now realized that if you want to add some really cool wheels, like for example, these choppers from J Concepts, absolutely beautiful, true beadlock wheels. Now, the problem lies in the actual hubs, okay? Traxxas, again, with their proprietary stuff, making it very difficult. You cannot use these wheels on these hubs because they actually protrude just a hair so that it bumps up against this on all wheels. So here's some J Concepts, here's some Proline, here's the stock Kraton wheels. They don't work well with this at all because it won't allow you to properly tighten it up against this 24 mil nut. So that's very disappointing, which means I'm actually gonna have to upgrade to the Vidavon knuckles, which means I have to spend some more money. But it's just one of those things where, like, come on guys, like, just get your shit together. But it is something to note when you are buying this truck and to be aware of. Now, if you're just gonna stick with the Traxxas wheels, anything that they sell and offer, you're totally fine. But of course, there's so many cool options. Like, look at all these wheels. You know, these Magmas are for the 6S lineup, but they are gorgeous. And we have some coming in for this truck. But it's not gonna work for that truck. So we gotta get those hubs solved. But look at these freaking Proline paddle tires. Yo, they are so big. They are so big. Look at the height difference. I mean, I'm hoping we can take these to a very cool sand spot, maybe some dunes, definitely the beach, and play with these. Maybe in the snow come winter time. These are going to be real fun. And of course, the J Concepts, I mean, just, they're heavy, they're beefy, but man, these are going to be fun to try out. So that aside, I mean, all these wheels, we know we can just put them on right away because they don't have any clearance issues. So one more pro and con that nobody really likes to talk about because it's such a pain in the butt is the gearing. So in this thing, we have spent a ton of time and money going with the front, center, and rear diff from Vidavon on top of the pinion and spur, all mod 1.5. Now, mod 1.5 is a thicker gear. It is beefy, it is chunky and heavy, but with this plastic chassis, you get a lot of flex, okay? And then that creates a gap in the gears and can actually strip or chip the tooth, and it is just an absolute nightmare. It's a big deal on these trucks as well as the X-Max. So by strengthening the chassis and upgrading the gearing, you're getting rid of that problem, but that's a huge upgrade that you have to do. Now, I've seen people that keep them absolutely bone stock, and I think they perform quite well. And I think if you're conscious of that and the way you drive, it should last you quite some time before you actually have to get into maybe repairing or upgrading the gears. But that's something to keep in mind that is a con on this truck, but can be solved. I think this can be solved by the many of people out there talking about this very specific issue. Now, right out of the box, this comes with spiral gears, which is essentially what you're upgrading to in here, but it already exists in here. However, in my Kratons, I have had nothing but diff issues, and I have definitely mastered the 6S lineup diffs. I have bulletproofed them, and so I have some hesitancy to say that this is going to be that much better. But based on the design that they provide on the box, you can definitely see that these are going to be better right out of the box stock than these ones. So it may last a little longer. However, that doesn't mean that they're bulletproof. So shimming your diffs, the right fluids, the right gears, especially how thick they are, and making sure that you've covered any chassis flex, which they really have, especially in here. You can tell this brace right here on top of just the ultra thick chassis. I mean, you know, all the bracing here. I think we're going to get rid of a lot of that flex that plagues this truck, but that still doesn't mean that they're
invincible because there's a lot more grip on these tires. These tires are bigger. It's got an 1100 kV motor out of the box. It's going to have a tremendous amount of torque. So it still has the potential to strip, but I just want to make you guys aware of that because it's like the unsexy part of RCs is jumping into the gearing. And, you know, it takes time and money and research to really understand how to improve them and solve these issues. So if you're new to these platforms, you know, it might be worth looking into and watching some of the videos. We certainly have spent some time doing the diffs on this, so go have a watch on that. And if you're a Kraton 6S owner, I made an hour-long video bulletproofing the diff. So something to keep in mind. These gears are different altogether, so it's not a one-to-one, but Arma definitely also has their issues with gearing because these trucks are electric with a ton of power. So, you know, we can't complain. I think they're maybe equal on that regard. I've solved for that issue already on this truck, and time will have to tell how this one handles. But right out of the box, I'm pretty happy. That's definitely another win for the Kraton. And I think that comes to sort of the conclusion here of which truck I would buy if I was to buy one truck. And now, having owned many Arma vehicles and Traxxas vehicles, I am no longer biased to either brand. I think they do things differently and well in some regards and not well with other regards. Both of these trucks are absolute monsters, and I would have a great time owning either one of these. However, if I was to pick one all over again and I could only buy one ready to run, I think it's going to be the Kraton 8S. Now, simply because of the chassis being so solid with all the aluminum bracing, on top of the suspension being much more plush with that droop, and I like how big these tires are, that balloon, and have this kind of traction for all-terrain driving, great for bashing, doing backflips. I'm definitely liking that. Now, it comes stock with the 1100 kV motor, which does a lot as far as performance goes. So I'm going to say this is definitely the better truck if you just want to drive today. But if you got a few extra dollars, I'm going to say this is going to be the more epic truck. And you know what? It comes down to looks. I did a little poll recently showing you guys this, and it was really mixed. You know, some people like the XRT for bashing. Some people like the Kraton for bashing. Some people like the XRT for looks. Some people like the Kraton 8S for looks. You know what? I think it's your taste. Go after what you like. Just know that this might take a bit of extra dollars to get it to where you want it to be. But again, this may have its downfalls, but not impossible. And I think a really good deal right out of the box. So the arms could be a real downfall because if you keep breaking the arms all the time, you're going to go out, you're going to break them, and then you're probably not going to fix it in the field, and you're going to have a few minutes of fun and it's going to be over. So if that's the case, we'll have to find that out. Well, then we're going to have to take a look at this one. Now, I feel like the plastics and components are going to work way better on this right out of the box, but we do need to upgrade some of them. Now, you could keep the stock electronics. You don't have to go so crazy. We've done the diffs and the motor. We spent a ton of time. If you haven't seen the build series, go check this out. We've got 5 videos so far, more videos to come of actually bashing it, as well as tuning it. We've got a few things left to do, but this could be the better option. So if you have a bit of extra money, I would go with the Ultimate, and I would do something like the bash bars and possibly the mod 1.5 gearing. That's probably the main thing I would do and leave it there, and it would be an amazing truck to drive, okay? Whereas this one could go downhill really fast if things start to break in a way where it's not fun to replace them. These arms are a hell of a lot easier to replace, and if I break one, this is a few minutes I can do in the field, whereas oftentimes
doing the arms on the Kraton, it's just such a pain in the ass that you just tend to bring it home and now your bit of fun is done. So again, you really have to consider the wrenching, because we know things are going to break on both of them. They're both going to break, but which is going to break the right components or break less, or if I could upgrade a few components and it actually stands the test of time versus right out of the box, not upgraded. Like, you really have to weigh the pros and cons here. But right out of the box, I would go Kraton 8S. If you have a few extra bucks, I would go Ultimate and upgrade a few things like the bash bar and the mod 1.5 gearing. Those would be the main things I would do. And I think that truck would be my pick, which is obviously why I put all the money into this thing. This thing is gonna be my fun sender truck, even though it's like a beautiful show truck right now. It's gonna be so sad to turn it into a dirt monster, but we're gonna do that. We're gonna send it, and we're certainly gonna send both of these. So get subscribed, stay tuned, because you know we're gonna be making a ton of videos on both of these. And if you think differently than what I had to say, I'd love to hear it in the comments down below, because you know what? You may have a different experience, a different look, a different point of view. Let's go have a conversation in the comments. So I appreciate y'all. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.
Sunday!